Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Superman and Lois. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we've got Chrissy, Lois, and Clark obviously doing their investigations into Morgan Edge because they're trying to figure out why Smallville. Out of all the places he went there, he went to different places. He was here for some time. He was at the Carthage place for like a few months, but it's like, what specifically led him to Smallville? Even just the Epps kryptonite alone, there's got to be something else specifically tied. So, using the information they've got from Lana, they're slowly investigating this. Lana trying to be the best insider she can, but obviously, eventually Lois has no choice but to eventually intervene when it's like things are getting desperate. It's like, first and foremost, their current subjects kind of went off without a hitch, and so they're broadcasting ads out for more. They even saying like, trying to get the Smallville Gazette to put out an ad for them, and so she confronts him, and for him it's like, you think anyone's really going to believe you, the has-been that's now working at a small like town newspaper, or me? You know, for her, it's like, you're not going to get away with this. But for him, it's like, no, there's absolutely nothing you can stop me. Or that super friend of yours. And she's like, well, we'll see. You know, because even saying like, John Henry was right about what's coming. And I was like, how do you know about John Henry Irons? But I'm like, right, you have your connections, but also like, right, Rossetti was your insider. So of course you would know, you know, so I thought that was interesting. But another interesting angle to this episode is Clark being like, obviously he goes to Mexico to deal with an immediate robbery in Mexico. And in the moment he arrives there, he's breathing heavy. I was like, oh snap, the kryptonite. Because I'm about to say like, because Kara like inhaled kryptonite too, but this is synthetic kryptonite, so it's probably a little bit more potent than just like absorbing like regular kryptonite, because at the end of the day they have no idea what the effects are going to be. But the fact is, Clark takes everyone down systematically. Part of it, I mean, to be fair, he's going up against regular people, so no like full-blown punches. It's very similar to Smallville, because I remember that was always some people was complaining about Smallville, like Clark most times like would just push people. To be fair, he's going against mainly normal people, and he kind of went all out. He'd probably, you know, that's always the superhero thing of like, right, like if Spider-Man or Superman ever went full force with a lot of their fights sometimes, unless it's a superpowered person, you'd most likely like your fist would probably go straight through their head type of thing. It'd probably be that. But the fact is that Clark gets laid out by some like shotgun bullets, and you're like, whoa. Luckily he took the guys down, but I even love it, interestingly enough, they put it out there like, oh yeah, Superman kind of got taken down by a little bit. I'm like, well, I mean, I guess it's newsworthy because everyone else saw like, wow, did Superman get taken down by a shotgun? Because even the security guy was like, hey, are you okay? He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, wow, of course that's going to make public news, but still, it's just kind of interesting. It's like, it's kind of bad because it's like, I guess I'm curious what the newspaper says. Like, maybe Superman's tired. Maybe he had a rough day or something like that. Because I'm like, you're announcing to the world, hey, one of your most powerful beings is kind of having an off day. All supervillains in the world, this is the time to strike. I mean, you literally gave Edge and Leslie them thought of like, hey, this is actually the time to strike. So, but yeah, when Clark gets back home and Lois is like, oh my God, what happened? He's like, yeah, it was, were the kryptonite bullets? Not regular bullets. It's like, Superman isn't supposed to be bruised by bullets. And it's like, so they contact Sam, and obviously this isn't what they didn't know it was going to come down to. First and foremost, he didn't want to use the weapons against Clark. They hadn't been tested and stuff like that. Still doesn't make it better that you actually you made the weapons regardless, you know? So obviously you have Jonathan Jordan at school. Obviously Jordan's helping out Sarah with her performance and everything, and ultimately like obviously like partway through it he starts sneezing and he's got like the freeze breath. I was like, okay, so slowly but surely he is getting his dad's powers. Once again, I'm curious, is it just going to be a power level difference that's going to because he is half human? I'm wondering, is that going to like make him like half as strong as Superman? Like that's always been the conversation. I was also wondering like, would he end up having only a fraction in the abilities? But it seems like slowly but surely, once again, we're getting a little bit of like the full-blown Superman story while also kind of getting our Smallville story at the same time of like, right here I am developing all these different abilities and stuff that slowly but sure. That means at some point he's probably going to get to it sooner than Clark did in Smallville, but the whole taking flight thing, that's going to be a crazy situation because I mean, we've seen in other things more recently about like how that learning how to fly thing comes a little natural, but also takes quite a bit of practice and kind of like maneuvering and figuring out, you know? But because of it, he's sneezing like freeze breath, and so the synthetic kryptonite is affecting him differently. I'm curious, is it because Clark is a full-blown Kryptonian, plus he's had many run-ins with kryptonite, yeah, it's affecting him, but maybe not as bad as Jordan because Jordan is half human, so that still gives him like a human enough anatomy so that the kryptonite can still affect him. And cause obviously, as we know, kryptonite can poison a human. We saw that with like we've seen that with Orion and Batwoman, so it's not like that's like completely like, so like his human side is probably getting poisoned by it a lot worse than, because Clark, it seems like it's at least like, you know, it's kind of in his lungs, but he has full Kryptonian lungs to kind of counteract it. Plus, like I said, he's had enough experience with kryptonite, because anytime he's gotten hit by kryptonite, it's slowed him down, but it's never like taken him out. Like he got stabbed by kryptonite, he got shot by kryptonite, and it never took him down. Once again, this is synthetic. It's meant to be, you know, this is the Army putting their everything into it. So, I mean, granted, it hasn't been tested, but you'd assume it's supposed to be like more potent than like regular kryptonite. But you would think synthetic kryptonite wouldn't be as potent. Like I said, because Kara was kind of knocked out of commission for a while after inhaling like kryptonite when it was kind of put into the atmosphere and everything. So, I don't know. It's something to think about, which I think is kind of fascinating. But they don't have time to wait for Sam to come up with a cure. It's like, right, we need to get on this immediately. So Clark takes him to the Fortress of Solitude. But basically, the kryptonite is basically filling his lungs with liquid. And because of his cold breath, it's freezing it. So if they don't act quickly, his lungs are going to freeze and he's going to die. So he has to get heated. I thought like Clark was going to heat vision him. But it's like, no. Because I think if Clark went full heat vision on him, it would have like hurt a lot. Like, you know, it probably, you know, so they use like very specific lasers to kind of like compensate for that. Like, I think that's why it's like supposed to be spread all over his body, because if Clark uses heat vision, it'd be like concentrated heat. That'd be too much for the hand. So that's why those lasers like were hitting different points in his body to kind of spread the superheat around. At the same time, Lois confronts her dad, because it's like, you always put your job first. She's like, I used to kind of resent you for it, but eventually, like, I came to understand why you did it. I even came to respect you. But the fact of the matter is, you doing what you did put the people I love in danger. My husband, my son. Because that's the thing. Like, obviously for him, it's like, it was never meant to be this way. But it's like, at the time, the only like Kryptonians we know about on this Earth, you know, potentially once again, it seems like are still like the Earth Prime and everything. So it's like would be Kara and Clark. So it's like, you made this thing, you know, against my husband. It's like, yeah, but your husband's this powerful being, like he could, you know. But it's like, you should trust me enough to know my husband better enough to know that he would never do that. Like like she doesn't go into it, but it's like my judgment should be enough for you to be like, I chose to marry this man, I fell in love with this man, knowing all that, like that should be enough for you to know, like, right, Clark can be trusted. You're kind of letting, he already had his suspicions. Like this whole thing was set way before John, but it just like reactivated, like, oh, maybe we should put some work into this, like, you know. Not unless John was, but it seemed like this was already in like progress, and it kind of maybe got shut down, or not as much attention was being sent to it until John brought it up in episode 2 of like, you need to prepare for him, you don't trust him either. So it probably just solidified like, maybe I should kind of get back to working on it. So I don't know whether it was already a thing, or whether John Henry's like Iron's like appearance and talking to Sam made him decide to, like, you know, it was probably like a project that might have been in the works. Like, it might have been blueprints and ideas they passed around, but nothing had been worked on yet. Who knows? Whatever the case may be, it's still a thing of, this is your son-in-law you had these weapons prepared for. And also, it's like, the moment you find out, oh man, my grandson's got powers, I should probably not do this. It's that complicated thing, because it's like, yes, you shouldn't do that, but in the end, it is going to benefit you, because we are dealing with like rogue Kryptonians. So that's a whole thing, because obviously we had the whole Kelly thing, because you can tell immediately, how different she is. At first I wasn't sure what it, like, whether it was just like, because like later on she's like talking to Lana and no, she runs into Clark and she's like, oh my god, it's like, you know, she's like, I didn't know you're back in town and yada yada yada. I'm like, Okay, so I was like, did they just give her enough information with like this Kryptonian and subconscious in her mind? I'm like, did they just give her enough information that she's able to kind of have a casual conversation? Or, but later on it solidifies, basically there's two consciousnesses there, and so that basically when they get activated, the Kryptonian one takes over. Not based on the 100, you can't keep that up forever. Because they dealt with that in season 6, like there being multiple consciousnesses. And like, well, basically to have a conscious exist, like you would have to basically erase the other. So that was a whole thing in season 6. But I'm like, usually it was like, oh, to get that new conscious there, the other one had to be overwritten. So maybe it's a slow process to basically phase out the original personality. Like, for example, in Kelly's case, her personality. Obviously, Lana's trying to dig deeper. Morgan confronts her because it's like, oh, no. Like, the fact of the matter is, of course you'd be feeding information to Lois. So she's like, I promise you I wasn't. It's like, oh, it's fine. It doesn't matter. The fact that she showed up like that means she's just so desperate. But it's, hey, I can offer you something better. So they did start crossing my mind. I'm like, is Lana, because Lana was kind of acting a little like, oh, no, I know everything. I'm like, that was either her playing coy or that was her, like, being like, oh, were you infected? There's other elements, interestingly enough, too. Like, obviously, because he's sick, Jordan couldn't go help Sarah. But for him, it's like, obviously, he cares for Sarah, like, more than just a friend. But, you know, at the end of the day, it has to be her decision whether that goes further. And even she's like, when she feels like Jordan kind of abandoned her, like, for him, it's like, no, I've got to be there. Like, her dad already abandoned her. I can't, like, be another person that lets her down. And so for her, it's like, I thought we were enjoying ourselves, like the time we were spending together, but it's like, yeah, it's like, but then John tried to be like, no, it's not you, Sarah. I'll figure out what's going on. Which he tried to take his shot with Tegan, and she was like, no, sorry. I thought you looked lonely, you had a broken arm. She's like, no, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Like, no, it's cool. I'm like, it could have worded that better, you know? It's like, I mean, you're teenagers, so you don't think everything through on what you should say and stuff like that. So there's that. But I'm like, I wonder if there's something more to that, because even Sarah was like, yeah, don't go down that route. I'm like, what does Sarah know that, like, Jonathan doesn't know about those circumstances? I don't know. But, regardless, I'd gone on a huge tangent and left it, but, like, Lois was basically telling Sam and never to come back to the house. And then I liked the conversation Jonathan had both with Lois and Sam. Lois, with the fact is that she's like blaming herself. It's like, no matter what I do, I always turn around and you guys are like, I can't protect my kids. Like, you almost died in John's RV last episode. Then there was a car accident. He's like, yeah, but those were on me. And it's like this. It's just like, why is it so hard for me to protect my kids? It's like, you know, it's like, right, we're part of a super family, but everything's going to be okay, Mom, you know? His mom was there to kind of like comfort him last episode. Now he's, you know, returning to faith. Well, it was kind of a mutual comfort like last episode, but it's, you know, it's there to, you know, it's like, right, I've got to be, you know, for him, I think for Jonathan, it's, I got to be strong for my mom, you know, considering everything she's got to go through. So, you know, because you can only be strong for so long before like someone else needs to kind of be there to lean on you lean on their shoulder and they lean on yours. But his confrontation with his grandpa, with Sam, was really interesting too, because it's like, why'd you make those weapons get my dad? It's like, your dad's the most powerful being in the world and stuff like that. He's like, yeah, but because basically for Sam, it's like, you haven't seen what I've seen. Like, you only have your perspective on things. You've only known about him being Superman for this limited amount of time. I've known for a while and seen what he's capable of. Which is also like, but you've also seen the good that he's capable of, the humanity that exists with him. Because for Jordan, I mean, for Jonathan, it's like, I would never be afraid of my family. Like, I would trust them. He's like, but you are right. I haven't seen what you've seen, but no matter what would happen, I would still trust them. Instead of basically being a coward like you. You know, because that is the thing of like, he never opens himself up to, you know, I guess with his line of work, it is a thing of like, his job is to look out for the U.S.'s like best, you know, what's best for the U.S. and potentially having Superman as an enemy, not the best, obviously. So, I mean, not just for the U.S., but obviously the world in general as well. But it is also the thing of like, right, this is my family. I should be looking at this from a certain perspective. But then at the performance and everything, we have Sarah doing her thing and her dad coming up and it's like, oh, it's a touching moment. And then I was like, has Kyle been body snatched? I was curious about that, which is how different he was. And especially later on, he's like, no, I'm going to check on Kelly. I was like, oh boy. I was like, is he? And especially later on when he showed up, I was like, oh, your timing's a little too perfect. Like, you just happen to follow her, like, all the way to the Kent farm? That's a little suspicious. But the moment he was like, at the beginning when he was just like, hey, everything's all good. And like, Sarah's like, yeah, he's acting all weird. And just like, oh, I was like, did he? It's like, to be fair, last episode, he was deep in the dumps. Because also, like, especially after, like, he was already bad enough, but then, like, the whole Sarah conversation made him feel worse. It's like, no, I need to do better. I need to be better. Sadly, we find out he did go to Morgan. So, luckily, that was kind of a scary moment, though, like, when Kelly and that other dude rolled up, and it's like, yo, and then, like, oh, no, Superman's not going to help you this time. Luckily, Sam was there with some canisters of that synthetic kryptonite. Jonathan kept some of John's weapons, those plasma weapons. It's like, yeah, he's like, at the end of the day, Mom's probably not going to let me keep those, but still, it helped out. But luckily, Clark showed up in time to deal with Kyle. I figured as much, but that's still a nice reveal, though. I mean, I think a lot of people are kind of expecting that was going to end up being a thing. I still think they went about it in a nice way to kind of like, you might have an idea, but you're not 100% sure. Like I said, there's definitely hints just with his behavior this episode. The argument could just be like, no, he's just doing that because he's trying to make up things between him and Sarah, so that could be the argument, but it's like, no, like, I thought that was really interesting, so. But now that we know there are dual consciousnesses going on, like, we do know, like, okay, so they're not going to be aware of everything that's going on. It wasn't just Lois and Jonathan, but even Jordan and Clark, because Clark was apologizing to Jordan. It's like, yeah, all that you're going through, you shouldn't have to be dealing with this, but you're dealing with this because of who I am. You didn't ask for this, and you know, Jordan's like, I didn't, but you didn't ask for it either. It's like, it's just kind of like the dice they were rolled. It's like, we didn't ask for this, but we're here. So, interesting developments on that front. Obviously, the sad thing is Sarah's going to be a little upset with Jordan because, like, all right, when I needed you kind of abandoned me. My dad was kind of there for me, so that's going to be a complicated one. Because even, like, Jordan's like, so what are they going to tell, like, Sarah or something? Like, are they going to say anything at all? Because Sam's keeping, like, some military people here in town. You know, he had that heart-to-heart with Lois where he was like, right, you were right. I kind of put my job first. I wasn't there for you, and I apologize, you know. But for her, it's like, you were tonight. Because he talked about, like, yeah, the ice pack thing, it's like, yeah, you used to come home with so many bruises all the time, but that's because I wasn't there to protect you. But she's like, you were tonight. He's like, so Smallville, Clark, the boys, and you, the fact of the matter is, it is my top priority, so I'm not leaving. We're not leaving until this is all settled, you know? So I thought that was pretty dope. So, granted, once again, it's kind of sucky you had those weapons, but in the long run, it kind of worked out because it's kind of a thing where you need those weapons considering, like, what's going on. And I had a feeling, I was like, the way Morgan's been acting, and Morgan Edge has been acting, and the fact is he's done all this, I was like, he must have a, Kryptonian inside of him thing. We'll get to that in a second. But I love the reveal of, like, why he's actually in Smallville. Because we end up finding out, like, Leslie's real name and the dude from the motel. The ones with the, like, actual solidified powers. Because it's like, right, Mrs. Powell's son was like, yeah, I was already dead. But it's like, what was that all about? Like, why was he in Smallville? It turns out the perfect people and why he's recruiting people specifically from Smallville now. It's like, because like kryptonite was raining down on Earth when, you know, after Krypton exploded all over the world, but yellow kryptonite exists specifically here in Smallville, and so these people have been living in Smallville their entire lives, like slowly getting exposed to it because it's been underground all these years or all these decades, and so that's what makes them the perfect host. Why, like, the transfer of the Kryptonian conscience and powers and stuff like that doesn't kill them like it did the others, because their bodies have adapted to it from all the kryptonite they've been absorbing. I was like, that's such an interesting reveal. That's super dope. So that's why he picked Smallville, because Smallville is literally the only place he can get his army, because he can't do this anywhere else in the world without it being a failed thing. Here, like, he needs literally the entire town of people, which also explains why Tag has powers, meaning every teenager can have powers. Sarah can end up getting powers if we go down this route too, so Granted, Tag didn't go through the element of like, right, I've got Kryptonian inside of me, but more so like, so we could potentially see that. So it is kind of like the quote unquote Meteor Freak thing from Smallville on an even bigger scale, because the Meteor Freak thing would happen like one at a time. Like, yeah, it happened to quite a few people, but it was still one at a time. Literally the entirety of Smallville, those of a relative age, could be on their way, like could be housed Kryptonian subconscious, and there could be people like Sarah who could just naturally get powers. Still, sadly, it still would mean that Jordan would be the only one without powers, because he didn't grow up in Smallville, so he'd still kind of have that disadvantage. But we might just see it being him with his mom, like, right, I'm just gonna lock and load, and it might be kind of similar to an Alex thing, because Alex is like the only one of the squad. He might kind of go an Alex or Jimmy route, where Jimmy became Guardian, that maybe like Jordan kind of becomes like that, a vigilante hero in its own right as well. When his conversation with Jordan, I'm curious, like, for him, it's like, right, I do have the weapons to kind of be on the same level, like, Dad and Jordan are weapons, like, that was the whole conversation last episode. He did have this look, like, I wonder, did some of what Sam said kind of get to him? Not that he distrusts his family, but, right, like, the fact is, without those weapons, he doesn't have what it takes on his own, necessarily, to save and protect his family, like, in case Jordan or Clark isn't there. So, I'm wondering, on some level, did that conversation affect him, or just the thought of that? Like, it's just like that conversation he was having with Jordan, it just hit a little differently. But now Lana knows about Kyle. She's like, oh, she's like, you went to go see Ed. She's like, yeah, I just want to be a better version of myself. So Lana's probably going to bring Kyle into the fold of like, right, so this is going on, I've been working with Lois, this is what Morgan Edge has actually really been up to and everything. So, but then like Clark hears the alarm that what's the ELT, he said, it goes off, and it's like, it's Lois's, and she's like, which I never thought about that. That's interesting. Of course he would know which one it is, not just by direction, but he probably has it tuned, so like specific frequencies tells him like who he's honing in on, like, ahead of time, because he knew specifically it was Lois's, because to be fair, Kelly took it. So I didn't think about that, but it's like, yeah, he knew specifically. It's like, no, it's yours. So it's like, there must be specifically a specific tuned frequency that, like, right, they'll always get his attention, but they're different enough for he can distinguish whose it is, whether it's Jordan, whether it's Jonathan, whether it's Sam, or whether it's Lois. But he shows up and Edge is there, and he's kind of in a Kryptonian garb. And I'm like, wait, are we going to find out that he's Zod or something like that? That's what I was wondering. And because I was like, is he possessed? He's like, oh, you didn't think I'd give myself powers too? It's time for you to know who I really am, brother. And the moment he said that, I was like, oh, very reminiscent to another parallel of Mark, we need to talk. It felt like that. I was like, yo! But then immediately I'm like, is he going to be Zod? That's going to be interesting. Because I don't know if they've done this comic in the comics or not. But if you aren't aware with Krypton, this is going to be a spoilers. But sadly, the show was canceled. Still, always a possible. You're still holding out hope on some level. It's super unlikely, but that it could pick up in some future sense. But I doubt that. But so some spoilers for Krypton. We end up finding out that Seg is Clark's grandfather. Well, Seg is also Zod's father in that continuity. Him and Jor-El have different mothers. His mom is Lyta, she's of the Zod family, and then Jor-El's mom is Nyssa. So, once again, I don't know how many comic books have ever really gone down the Krypton route except for Krypton, but I'm wondering, are they doing kind of a similar thing in this regard where he was like, brother, like, maybe they're applying that a little bit where it's like, nah, in this continuity, like, he probably wasn't just saying brother as like, oh, fellow Kryptonian. It might be like a straight up, nah, we're half brothers. Because he's like, I crashed on this planet the same day you did. So, that's interesting. Which is also interesting, too, because, like, that's also what happened. I don't think they're doing this, but that's actually how the Doomsday thing happened, because, like, Doomsday crash landed on Earth the same time Clark did. So, I don't think they're doing a Doomsday thing. I'm wondering, are they doing, like, a Zod thing? Is he Zod? And, because Zod hasn't popped up in this continuity. Like, Kara's never faced off against him. Dude from season 1 wasn't Zod. I'm pretty sure he wasn't. Their Aunt Astra's second in command. I don't think that was Zod. I don't think he was a Zod. I think, so I don't think a Zod's come up in this continuity, so he could easily be a Zod, which would also be interesting, too, because, like, just Morgan Edge and everything, but also, like, Lex got possessed by Zod in Smallville, too, so they might be kind of drawing a parallel in that regard as well. I don't know. Once again, I'm saying all this. He might not be Zod, but I feel like that's the go-to, especially with the whole brother response. But like I said, it could be fellow Kryptonian, but I think, like, we're setting up, like, now we're, like, half-brothers type of thing. That'd be interesting. Like I said, applying that Jor-El and Zod relationship, but applying it to him and Clark. Because Clark is supposed to be, like, older in this continuity and stuff like that. So that could still... that'd be so interesting, dude. Maybe it's a thing where he's Kryptonian, but he never developed his powers. That's why he had to kind of give himself some powers. Because, like, we saw a little bit of his past and stuff like that, but it's like, what was it, like 5 or 6 years ago, and he was somewhere and discovered, like, X-Kryptonite. That was probably him. He probably knew, like, oh, I'm a Kryptonian, but I don't have the benefit of Superman for whatever reason. My biology didn't activate the way his did, where he had powers from a very young age. I didn't. So this is, like, that's what this is all about. So... he'd even told Lois about the thing about, like, what John said of, like, right, we are his people, so who's to say he won't choose us? I mean, to be fair, Kara was kind of put in this exact position, still chose humanity above her people, because especially with the whole, oh, you're going to destroy this planet, especially because we know what you guys did on another Earth, so Clark's not going to go down that route, but maybe Clark is going to try and find another way around this without, like, oh, having to kill or destroy, especially considering, like, a lot of those Kryptonians are in regular people's bodies, like Kyle, as well as Kelly, as well as innocent people. I mean, I'm assuming Leslie is straight up like that Kryptonian, like whoever Leslie was is no longer, like, I doubt she slips back into being who she was before, because the Kryptonians probably completely overwritten her by now. So they still have some time to try and save Kyle and Kelly, as well as the most recent, like, transformees. But, this presents some really, really interesting stuff. Like I said, I'm so interested to see what this reveal with Morgan Edge is going to be. I thought that was kind of interesting. Not just straight up like, oh, no, I've got powers. It's like, nah, and he's also wearing the black, too. But that's specifically, like, Zod and his people were even in, like, Man of Steel. So, I mean, I think they typically wear the black anyway, so... but even then, because even Zod still referred to Clark, even though they're not, like, biological Kryptonian brothers, they're still brothers in arms with fellow Kryptonians, so that could still be what they're going for. That'd be interesting, too, if this is actually his first encounter with Zod, like, considering, like, he's been Superman for decades, and, like, oh, now I'm, like, encountering, like, one of my, like, well-known villains. You know, it's just interesting. Once again, like, it's like, I brought it up with, like, Batwoman, like, what, like, Gotham villains are already established, and we know a handful, like the Riddler, because we got introduced to his daughter. Because of the crossovers, we also know some of the ones that exist. To be fair, that was pre-Crisis, but you assume, like, even then, it probably still keeps some of that intact. Whatever the case may be. I'm rambling, but I'm really, really excited to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.